And then, of course, it tells us very specifically how bad the world had become. The human race had become so awful that the Lord regretted that he had made human beings. We could get caught up there too, right? Didn't God know from before? Doesn't God know everything that's going to happen from before the beginning? The answer is yes. How can God regret something? We could get caught up talking about that for a long time. I think this is more like God is not saying he really wished he had never done this to begin with. But sometimes you let your children do things, if you are a parent, because you know that they need to learn and grow. And sometimes the results of that, giving your children freedom, can be really awful. And in the moment, it can feel like, oh, why did I ever... Even though you know that long term, it was the right move. And I think that's some of what's going on with God here. You can see the heart of the God who created the universe. He loves. He is a lot like us as well. We're like him. But we can think of it as he's like us in certain ways, in that he feels things. And when he sees wickedness on the earth, this is very, very upsetting to him. God is more upset by sin, by evil, than any human being is upset by it. His heart was deeply troubled. So he decides to wipe human beings from the face of the earth. We can think about what the human race is like at this point. So I'm going to say a couple of points you can write down from this section. Faith is an anchor, and without it, we get pulled into the storm. That's what's being set up here. So we saw with Cain and Abel, we saw with Adam and Eve, they failed to have faith, to trust God, right? And that took them a certain distance. Death entered the world. But things weren't as bad as they could possibly get. Their kids got even worse, right? One murders the other. And then Cain started a sort of a civilization, and we talked about last week, what were Cain's descendants like? They were really bad, right? Everything was based on power, right? Who can control the other person? There were really no governments at this time. Think about what it would be like if every human being related to every other human being by just who's stronger and who can kill the other, who can dominate. This is what the world was like. If we think of, and we can see faith, so Abel was trusting God, but Cain kills him. And as we go through the text more and more, Noah here is going to be described in a minute as a person of faith, a person who's actually walking with God. We'll talk about what that means. Without that, human life spirals into like a death cycle. We talked about this in our Romans series. I called it the free fall in that series, right? Human life just gets worse and worse. So one of the things we need to think about today is, what does faith actually do for an individual human being and for society and the world as a whole? Because it is the most important thing. We're going to see that as we go through. Without faith, life is a disaster. That's why this disaster comes, because everyone's trying to live life simply on their own terms without reference to God. And when that happens, especially if everyone does it, things turn into, just imagine some of the worst places in the world right now. Things turn into that or even worse when there is no faith. Without faith, the world actually becomes a disaster. So bad that it's better for God to kill everyone. This is actually an act of mercy by God. Sometimes life can become worse than death.